No, go away, clouds. Go away. What's up, nerds? It's your boy, the OGGM, coming to you live from Site B. I'm eating a cracker. On this Saturday, the 22nd of June, 2022 at 8:22 in the morning. That's a lot of 2020s. It is Free RPG Day weekend and Origins weekend. So I thought just to do something different with our, let's see, it's 2024 and I started doing this in 2016. We've been doing this for a while now. So I thought we'd revisit some of the videos I made when I first started out. And one of the first videos I ever made was, what is a dungeon? And certain individuals took umbrage with that video and made some rather ugly commentaries about that video. So I revisited that yesterday with my, what is a dungeon? Now I have to follow that up with, of course, what is a mega dungeon? Now you may have heard this word, and like a lot of people, you're like, what's the difference? Mega, well, it's bigger, right? Right? I mean, here's a map I found of a random dungeon online. It looks like it's about, I don't know, maybe 100 rooms, at least 50 rooms. And here's a mega dungeon I found. A couple hundred rooms, but I mean, really, is it the size? I mean, this one is a little larger than this one, but still, you know, it's they could both be dungeons or they could both be mega dungeons. They're both very large. They have a lot of rooms. There should be a lot going on. This one is definitely a little larger, but still, is there that much of a difference? Is it just the size? And I think that's most people figure, you know, the difference between the word mega dungeon and the word dungeon is a mega dungeon is larger and makes less sense. Because like you're like, okay, this has got like a couple thousand rooms. It's going to take us a year to go through this place. Who built this and why is it so freaking big? And why are we here? So is it the size? Size doesn't matter. No, I mean, yes, but no. It's not the size, you know, because you can have dungeon maps with hundreds of rooms. I mean, the map of Expedition to the Barrier Peak, each level of the spaceship is like almost 100 rooms. So its size is, but not really, because you can have very small dungeons. You can have very big dungeons. You can have very, very small mega dungeons. You can have incredibly huge mega dungeons. The definition of mega dungeon is not necessarily that a mega dungeon has more rooms. What defines a mega dungeon versus a dungeon, at least in my humble opinion, is two things. 2.5 things. Okay, thing number one. Dungeons tend to be static, right? They tend to have one story to tell, and once you've completed the story of the dungeon, you don't really have to go back. And they're finite. Like if there's, 36 orcs total in this dungeon and you kill them, that's it. There's never going to be more orcs unless some orcs come from the outside. But the number of orcs, the number of encounters, the number of things that are going to happen in this dungeon are finite. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. And once you've completed it, do you really have any reason to return? I mean, sometimes there's multi-parts where you go through and explore, blah, 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 whatever. You know what I mean? But generally, once you finish the Temple of the Sandworm, you never have no real reason to go back to the Temple of the Sandworm unless something you missed, or you think, hey, we've cleared this temple out. Why don't we make it our base? But other than that, I was like, yeah, let the villagers deal with it. They can use it for storage or something. Right? You move on. So the amount of encounters, finite. The amount of things you can do, finite. The dungeon usually has a beginning, middle, and end story to tell. And once that story is over, you don't really have a reason to return. Mega dungeons, on the other side, are not finite. And part of that, again, is because of the size. But a mega dungeon has things going for it. Like mega dungeons replenish themselves. If I go into the mega dungeon and kill a room full of orcs, because mega dungeons are not finite, because they're constantly living, growing, breathing things, and because they are so large, and there's always something going on in the mega dungeon. They're not finite. They don't have just one story to tell. So if I go into room 15 and kill the encounter in room 15 and then leave room 15, I could come back and something brand new will have moved into room 15. Every time I leave the dungeon, I might receive a new quest to go and explore a different part of the mega dungeon. You know, the first 5, 10, 15 rooms might be a whole complete story, but then the next 5, 10, 15 rooms might be a completely different story. And you can do that with a mega dungeon. You could have one section all themed to one story, and then another section all themed to another story. And there's reasons to go in and out. Mega dungeons tend to have more entrances, more exits, more things to do, more stories. So a mega dungeon is infinite. There's always something going on, and you can always have more reasons to go back. Returning more than one time is one of the main cornerstones of a mega dungeon. You could run entire campaigns around a mega dungeon. The second thing is space, and not space by how big of it, how much wasted space. In a dungeon, because a dungeon is finite and a dungeon is built around a very specific thing, there's going to be very little wasted space because you need to, you have to have rooms for your monsters, laboratories, bathrooms, kitchens, storerooms, cultist rooms, wizards' laboratories, spawning pits, whatever, every room in this house is not just there because there's going to be very little or no wasted space in a dungeon, and every room tells part of the story of the dungeon. Every room in your house tells part of the story of the house. You don't really have that many rooms in your house that are empty, that just are there. On the other hand, in a mega dungeon, there's going to be wasted space. In fact, you want wasted space. You want whole sections where they never encounter anything. You want empty rooms. You want things that are like, why is this room here? Because that builds up the mystery. Why is this room here? And also it leads to the possibility that in the future, something will move into that room, which goes back to the first. With a mega dungeon, there's always something going on. There's always wandering monsters. There's always new things. There's other adventuring parties. There's always something going on. So even if there is an empty room now, when you return, back to reason number one, there's a chance that there's something will be in that empty room. So dungeon, consistent, self-contained story, beginning, middle, and end. Once you've completed it, you don't really have to go back. Mega dungeon, not a consistent story. Lots of reasons to go back. And the stories can continuously change. The story of the mega dungeon is always evolving. As you explore more of it, you discover more of it. So mega dungeons are not finite. They do not have necessarily a beginning, middle, or end. They just have the point in time when you start and the point in time when you give up. On a side note, you can also throw in more weird shit in a mega dungeon because you are dealing with wade space. Now, the disadvantages of a mega dungeon versus a dungeon is mega dungeons tend to take a long time. It's in the name. You don't just finish it in a 1 or 2 day state like you would a module. Once you start a mega dungeon, that's a dedication. You're like, we are going to dedicate a huge chunk of our time to this place and the stories it has to tell. And that can become a slog, especially if the DM doesn't keep it interesting. I mean, sure, kick open the door, kill the monsters is exciting at first, the first few times. But after the first few 100 times, then you're just like, oh, more orcs, kick open the door. Oh, look, more skeletons, slash. It becomes a slog. It becomes just a grind. And after a while, even the most diehard murder hobo, I just want to kill things, is going to get bored with the grind that a mega dungeon can become. So you have to keep it interesting. That's one of the biggest disadvantages. You have to want to give them reasons to keep going back. Otherwise, you've just wasted all that time building it if they're like, I don't want to go back there. That was dumb. Let's move on. The second problem about a mega dungeon is, how do you justify it? How did something this big come into existence? Because, you know, nobody sets out to build a mega dungeon. They just kind of happen. Usually it's, you know, bad guys set out to do one thing. And then while doing that one thing, they break into a larger cave complex, or they break into an abandoned city. And then that somehow becomes part of the larger thing. And then just other things happen. But it's not like, you know, they set out to make this huge sprawling thing. It just sort of happened over time. Which means there's going to be more people aware of it. You know, you can't hide a mega dungeon. One of the great things about, of course, Waterdeep Undermountain is, you know, oh, nobody knows Undermountain's there. You know, it's a known secret. It's like, how could you not know Undermountain's there? Everybody knows Undermountain's there, right? You know, so you can't keep it secret. You have to keep it interesting. You have to keep it fresh. You have to give a reason for them to keep going. And if they're faced with that idea of mega dungeon equals slog, and you as a DM can't keep it interesting, because I've been in mega dungeons that were just nonstop, kept me involved. And I've been in mega dungeons that were just so fucking boring and uninteresting that even when the players tried to make it more interesting, that it's just like, you know what, fuck this. And a bunch of people were just like, dude, if you don't make this more interesting, we're done. We're just going to leave. Now, it's very easy to run a dungeon, but as we just said, it's very hard to run a mega dungeon because you have to give them reasons to keep going back, and you have to justify why it's there. And over the years, what has come across to me and some other people that I've talked to about it is you don't tell them you're running a mega dungeon. Because really, a mega dungeon is a bunch of interconnected smaller dungeons. Over here, we have the undead section. Over here, we have the Wizard's Laboratory section. Over here, we have just a bunch of orcs doing orc stuff, you know, and it's all connected to an abandoned mine. So the last couple times I ran mega dungeons, I didn't tell them it was a mega dungeon. I just ran it as if they were individual adventures. You know, they would go in through one entrance, do some things. They might get hints that there are larger things going on, but once they've accomplished the goal, they left, and then they could go and do with a different entrance or move along and then do something else, and then discover after a while that, hey, you know, the first thing we did and the third thing we did are both part of this and then same thing. And then it's just like, you know, 5 adventures in, they start to realize, wait a minute, 10 adventures in, it's even becoming more like, wait, this is just are we in just a very big place? Because these rooms look a lot like the last rooms, you know? So I think the best way to do it is to run it as individual baby dungeons and let them discover on their own that they are actually going through Undermountain or your mega dungeon of choice, rather than just tell them. You know, when I ran the Borrow Maze, I didn't tell them they were in the Borrow Mazes mega dungeon. When I ran Rapid Athuk, I didn't tell them they were in Rapid Athuk. I just ran it as little teeny things, and, you know, it went as far as it went. So there you go, revisiting a video I made in the past about mega dungeons versus dungeons for free RPG day. If you look at the old video, I definitely have changed some of my ideas about it. But still, I think it's pretty much spot on in the static versus non-static. Dungeon, static, mega dungeon, constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly evolving, constantly things to go back. Dungeon, once you're done, you don't really have to go back. Mega dungeon, there's always reasons to go back, and it's always growing and changing and telling hundreds of new stories. That's the philosophical difference. Anyways, I hope you appreciated this. Have a great Saturday. We'll talk to you later. Get off my land. Please like, please share, please subscribe.
Yo, check. Yeah, we're not the type to play games. You can